extinct giant cattle that roamed Europe, and it represented strength of will. Some runic inscriptions were thought to be magic spells and were meant to be spoken with the Goldrelog, a specific poetic rhythm, to unleash their power. This spoken origin may be much older than the written form of runes. Legend has it that runes always existed and were discovered by the war god Odin as he underwent a terrible ordeal, hanging from the world tree Yggdrasil. The runes were carved into the trunk by the three Norns, the female beings believed to control fate. Runes showed the Norns' power to carve out the fate of all. Wizards, kings, and dragons. From the late 12th century, French writers began to create stories for the elite called chivalric romances, often filled with magic. They focused on heroic, questing knights who lived by a code of loyalty, honour, and courtly love. Many of the most famous examples are about King Arthur. Hinted at in Welsh legend, King Arthur may have been a 6th century British king who won a victory over invading Saxons. But the story of Arthur, as it is now told, emerged in British cleric Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, 1136. It inspired many Arthurian romances, such as that of French poet Chrétien de Troyes, the first to include the doomed love between Sir Lancelot and Queen Guinevere. The Arthurian tales are rich in magic, featuring enchanted swords, vanishing castles, the quest for the Holy Grail, said to have miraculous powers including granting eternal youth, and the famous wizard Merlin. Geoffrey of Monmouth first introduced Merlin, inspired by legendary Welsh prophet and bard Myrddin, in his Prophetae Merlinae, 1135. In Geoffrey's interpretation of the legend of Merlin, the British king Vortigern's vision of a red and white dragon fighting, shown here, represented the battle between Britons and Saxons, while the white Saxon dragon winning. Geoffrey also gave Merlin a magical adversary, the sorceress Morgan Le Fay. Cunning folk. Historically, magic has often been divided into high, learned magic and low, popular or folk magic, and this distinction held true between the 1400s and 1600s. Popular magic featured herbs and animals said to have special powers, traditional beliefs, and protective charms. It overlapped with folk healing and good witchcraft, as well as with some higher learned magic. Central to popular magic were its practitioners, often called cunning folk. persecution and problems. Many Renaissance folk practices were continuations from medieval times. However, in the 1500s, spiritual dabblings were increasingly considered a threat to authority, that of the state and the church, and legislation was sought to control them. What was perceived as harmful witchcraft was obviously a prime target, and indeed some cunning folk did follow darker arts, but benign practices could also be condemned. Nevertheless, despite fluctuating threats during the 1500s, the practices of cunning folk seemed to flourish in many ways. This era brought with it some terrible events across the globe, from European plague pandemics in the 1500s and 1600s to catastrophic earthquakes and floods, such as the Netherlands' St. Felix's flood in 1530, as well as famine among 17th century North American settlers. In addition, life was brutally hard for ordinary people. It is likely that popular magic brought much needed solace to the poorest in society. Fairies and folk wisdom. Cunning men and women frequently invoked and had conversations with an army of spirits that were generally thought of as fairies. In effect, fairies were a magic practitioner's familiar spirit helper, similar in some ways to the animal familiars that they also often used. For example, a cunning man might consult his fairy spirit guide to discover where someone's lost object was hidden. Other beings that featured in popular magic included elves and fantastical creatures such as the unicorn. Here, so-called unicorn horns, in reality often narwhal tusks, were considered especially potent for magic and folk healing practices. Magic or illusion. Magic tricks date back to ancient times, and by the medieval era all kinds of magic were performed as street entertainment. Renaissance conjurers continued this tradition, bringing their illusions to marketplaces and fairs, as well as into the homes of aristocrats and royalty. In this picture, an onlooker who is fascinated by a magician's performance fails to notice his purse being stolen. Frogs apparently jumping from the onlooker's mouth and an owl peeking from the conjurer's basket may symbolise heresy, devilry, clever bewitchment, or the loss of reason. On and around the conjurer's table are various tools of the trade, including Castle of Otranto, a supernatural mystery featuring an ancient prophecy set in an eerie castle, published 30 years later. Matthew G. Monk Lewis's The Monk is claimed as English literature's first horror novel, and it includes both black magic and Satanism. Other masterpieces of Gothic horror are Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, in which a scientist